Are you recording in progress? Yes, I have already. Yeah. Okay, call this meeting to order at 6 p.m. Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. This is the planning commission for regular meeting. Roll call.
Buck,
Here.
Detmer, here, Nick Sweeney,
Here.
Meridian,
Here.
Newman,
Here.
Paul,
Here.
Robson,
Present.
Wilma.
Here.
All right, approval of minutes for the November 15th minutes. Any corrections, changes?
Buck,
Oh, that's weird.
Instant replay.
So do I need to pause for that to get fixed? So I need a motion to accept the minutes.
I shall move. Second.
Okay, Charlie makes the motion. Ted seconds, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
All right. They have been approved. Moving on to old business, review amended electric vehicle charging stations ordinance language. Would you like to start?
Yes, I can. Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. The ordinance, as we talked about at the last meeting, we sent the ordinance out to Public Safety, the Emmett County Building Department, and to Mike Robbins, Department of Public Works, who oversees the electrical system for the city, and Mike didn't have any additional comments. We did have a couple of comments from Emmett County, which are listed in red in the ordinance. And then public safety under equipment standards, which is on third page of the ordinance. They added two provisions regarding reference to the NFPA 70 electrical charging system equipment code and underwriters. So as requested, we went out for 3 reviews. They all came back. We had some minor revisions, and the ordinance is back on the table for the PC to take it from there.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, the one addition from public safety on line 103 and 104. Not less than 10 feet from any building. Does that also apply to residential installations?
No, that's primarily commercial.
Is it differentiated here?
No, but the building code, the fire and the electrical code and the fire code will mandate how far and close to a building, but the this is in proximity or in relationship primarily to commercial buildings.
Should we say in commercial zones, electrical charging stations shall be installed? Do you want
That's
to do
fine.
that?
Just question, are you pretty sure that, because it seems like a somewhat of a reasonable safety, not
Well-
closer than 10 feet to a structure,
Well, if you're talking
although,
commissioner in a 1-car garage and 10 feet away from the wall, you're not going to be able to park in the garage.
Right.
It's 18 feet wide.
but of course you can have a charging station inside a garage.
Yes, you can.
So,
Yes.
So is your point?
I think,
We want to encourage them to be inside garages, and if we make it 10 feet.
no, it's, in thinking about it more with those comments, it's obviously if you can put one in your garage. If it's outside the garage, why would you have to keep it 10 feet away
Feet away.
for safety? It
Yeah.
doesn't seem you would need to mandate. that.
Right, so
Yeah.
do we need to spell out that this is in commercial zones adequate? to explain which zones we're talking about?
Sure, if you want to put it in.
I don't know, how does the,
I would,
Or non-residential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
okay,
that,
excellent, thank you. And non-residential. Okay, any other questions? Comments?
Just a general question, just more perhaps, for my own education. Line 88, ADA accessible. Should there be any size, does there need to be any size associated with an ADA space for a charging station? Does it need to be larger, for example, than a typical? It does not.
No, it just needs the committee inserted ADA accessible in front of every word term that had accessible, primarily just to differentiate those parking spaces from normal parking spaces. But there's not going to be there's no requirement to enlarge a ADA accessible parking space if it's got access to a charger.
Well, our definition is ADA, which is line 4. ADA accessible electric vehicle charging station, an electric vehicle charging station where the battery changing station is adjacent to an ADA access aisle and electrical vehicle parking space. So does that explain it for you?
Not really. I was more of a question of, does the space have to be larger because of ADA typical requirements?
It does not.
There are very specific ADA requirements, though, that do specify the size of the space and the access area that services the space. So that's called out in the ADA.
and the curb cut.
Yeah, all those kind of things are very specifically called out. Not in this ordinance, but in the ADA standards.
And then the section starting on line 80, just for general parking, just so I can understand. The in section 2 there, if it's a new, is the requirement for the parking, is this in addition to the minimum requirements for a construction?
No, it doesn't have any impact on, you don't have to
I
provide.
think I have the right section.
By choice, by owner,
Pardon me?
by owner's choice.
It's my owner's choice. But you don't, let's say the ordinance required you to have 8 parking spaces. And you wanted one of those to be an EV charging station.
That does not require you
It
to have
does not require,
you can
it does not require.
That was my question
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
clarification. Thank you.
A question. On in line 65, the permitted locations. Where it says installation shall be subject to review by the zoning administrator, but yet but before that, it says that. Electric vehicle charging stations are permitted in every zoning district, so I'm a little unclear why. It goes before the zoning administrator.
Get a permit.
Oh, just to get the permit.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
I just have, so just as I was trying to understand the background, the zoning ordinance review committee, it says it. Had this before them and it said they needed input from these other bodies. So did it need to go back to them, or were they happy with the discussion and they just wanted to see if there's any additional?
It didn't go back to the review committee. The review
Right.
committee sent it to the PC last month. The PC said, let's send it to Public Safety Emmett County and the electric to Mike Robbins' department.
Okay,
And that's where they went.
Alright.
And the comments are either in red or purple. In terms of what their comments were.
Just a quick comment, Ted, the committee was not charged with review and editing of the original draft document. Other than to try and expedite those changes before the commission, it's really up to the commission as a whole to decide whether it wants to recommend this language going forward for a public hearing and then to council.
absolutely for the final decision. I just didn't know if they had sent it to these bodies and wanted to see it again or not before it came down, so.
No, we were open to their suggestions and included them. Anybody else? Comments or questions? I can get with Lisa. There's a few things where, commas don't need to be there. On line 25, it's the word purpose. It's a battery for motive purpose. Do we want to say purposes? Anybody? That is
What line was it?
Yeah, fine. And then on line 92, the second half of that line, on a residential zoned or occupied property. I looked at that and thought, well, maybe residentially zoned or residentially occupied made more sense. So I got a little stuck when I read residential zoned or occupied property. If it's residentially, then I understand that it's describing both nouns.
What number was it?
Number 92, last half of that line.
Well, up on line 60,
So are we agreeing to add an LY to the residential? Okay, so line 60.
well, I was just referring back up to line 68, where we're saying, I'm sorry, in the commercial, it says, or residential properties located in non-residential zoning districts. Should that be down in your, whatever line you were just talking about, like that type of definition?
I'm not seeing what line you're talking about here.
What was the line you were just correcting?
Line 92.
92. Where you said purposes only or located on a residential zoned or occupied property.
Uh-huh.
And then back up in 60. Sorry, too many lines. 62. I'm sorry, 72 says or residential properties located in a non-residential zoning district. Should we be using that?
That language
down in your,
it would probably make it clearer.
yeah.
Do you understand that, Lisa?
Yeah, I've got it.
So if for 72, in any residentially, add LY to that zone?
Well, no, now
No.
we're gonna
It's
replace
the
it.
definition that we can have residential and non-residential zones.
Yeah.
So we would just replace on a residential zone or occupied property with. In any residential zone or residential properties located in non-residential zoning districts. Okay, Lisa? Okay. All right, any other discussion? With anybody in the public would have. Want to make any comments?
Can I just bring up one more, going back to Richard's question on that line 69 and 70, and then also in the 73 and 74, where it says installation shall be subject to review by the zoning administrator and permit and inspection approval process. It's better administered by the Emmett County Building Department. So should we be saying that installation shall be subject to site plan review by the zoning administrator?
No,
No.
They're not required to submit a
Site
site
plan.
plan.
Okay. For commercial or residential?
no,
Okay.
both,
A drawing, but it's not a site
but
plan.
it's not a site plan.
So they'll be doing a site plan review application?
No.
No, zoning
Kind of like
permit
when you get
application.
a, okay, zoning permit. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
I mean, should we?
So the
spell that out?
administrator reviews the application. And the permit and inspection come from the county, Emmett County.
It's electrical.
And the
Okay.
electrical inspector.
All right. Anything else?
Well, if that's the case, you might not.
Clarify that.
Okay, by putting in a comma after the zoning. So the second portion reads. Package.
Well, one thing we could do is permit / inspection and get rid of that and then it'll be clear that. Let's do that. So administrator. Will it be a period and then permit and inspection approval process. Shall be administered by the Emmett County, yep. All right, so I'll read it out loud. The sentence is now going to read, installation, we're looking at the last word on line 72 and then going down to line 74. Installation shall be subject to review by the zoning administrator. Permit and inspection approval process shall be administered by the Emmett County Building Department. Okay.
But then the same is true up right up above, right on.
They're both going to get changed, but both of them are going to read the same. Very good. So we, are we ready to make a motion to have a public hearing?
Yeah, I would make a motion to schedule a public hearing on the electrical vehicle charging station ordinance for the public hearing for January 17, 2023, regular meeting of the planning commission. Sorry. Oh, sorry, 24. That's right. So we need that regular planning commission meeting January 17, 2024.
Oh, that's right.
With the noted changes we discussed, minor changes we discussed.
I second that.
All right, Ted makes the motion, Carolyn makes the second. Roll call vote, actually, this is just a hearing, so all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Let the record show all voted yes to the public hearing. Okay, moving on. To new business approval of 2024 meeting schedule. Any comments, any problems with the schedule? If there's acceptance, I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Charlie makes the motion, Ted seconds. All in favor? Aye. And let the record show everyone approved it. Okay, and now finally, the last item on our agenda. The proposed priority topics for discussion by the planning commission. John, did you want to have any comments?
I'm gonna turn it over to the Commissioner.
Yes, Commissioner Turk.
Well, as you know, the original list here goes back to 2022. And it was extracted and synthesized from the Living Petoskey Master Plan. And it just seems to me that at the end of the year, it's appropriate for the commission to set priorities in terms of which of these subjects, if any, we want to focus on and how we plan to go about organizing our efforts on those items. So this is just a prompt. It's not my own thoughts about priorities. The last page dated November 8th of 2023 were just some miscellaneous things that occurred to me, including some issues that I called unresolved because we as a commission never heard back formally what council had done with them or what they wanted us to do with them at that point. So those can probably be resolved with better communication back through staff to the commission on what the council had done with these items, but. There were just some additional clarifications here in terms of the sign ordinance, which has been a question of mine at various meetings, and how we wanted to organize our priorities for projects for 2024.
How about if we just address those last four items previously discussed by the commission but left unresolved? The possible ordinance changes went to city council, or maybe it never went back to city council, but city council decided they did not want to change the building heights. So that I think has been for now permanently tabled. So then the possible ordinance changes to B2 roof decks, top decks, I think that died at the commission. In part because the previous city planner didn't want to discuss it or deal with it. And I think, Rick, it seems like you had some input about that we really didn't want to tackle that. Do I have that memory right?
I think that's right. Again, I think that does bear discussion at some point.
Mhm.
Because people are using rooftops in a way that really makes the building another story taller. In some ways,
Mhm.
you know, how much of a roof should be allowed to be covered with a penthouse, or with fences and furniture and plants and things, before a building becomes a story higher than is on the ordinance allows. So that was my thinking.
So that may go on the list of things that we might want to talk about.
So
Discuss.
So I'm gonna check that off as something we might wanna bring back. And then ground floor uses in the central business district also died, I believe, at the commission table. Because it wasn't very practical. We don't want to give up, square footage on the main level for downtown because that's a finite number. So I think that just kind of was impractical and
Well, yeah, but my point here on these issues, after going back through a year's worth of
right.
minutes. I think that when these issues so-called die, it should be clarified in the minutes as to how the issue was disposed of.
Okay,
If it's tabled or if it's, we've decided not to pursue it.
well.
There could be something in the minutes.
Okay.
Typically in Robert's rules, if we want to proceed, we make motions to approve and do things, and certainly we can add things to agendas, but there's not, everything doesn't, in a typical Robert's rules.
Well, these were robust discussions that took some time, and they're just left open-ended in the minutes. So if you look back through the minutes, you have no idea what, if anything, was decided on how to proceed.
Well, you would see no motion to proceed, and you would see no further discussion, but the question is, if everything we discuss, do you want it to end in a vote? We're not going to discuss this any further. I don't know.
I think sometimes things are allowed to die quietly.
Okay.
So.
I think sometimes people want to think about things and they can bring them back up to.
True, yeah. All right, but my memory is that the ground floor, there was no appetite for doing the ground floor, so. I
So
think
there is a
that,
ground floor in the rear as well.
right. But I think in the end, there was no appetite for it. That's how I
not
remember.
clear to me. I know
Okay,
the front of the building was going to be reserved for retail on the ground floor. Absolutely, but unless it was one of those things that just died, the residential in the rear, I don't think there was any decision made on that.
Our understanding is the DMB said they were opposed to any ground floor residential in the rear of the buildings.
So I guess my issue is it'd be great to get feedback sometimes on these issues so that we could cross them off the list.
okay, well, can we consider that feedback?
Yeah, that's feedback.
So that's,
Cross 1 and 3 off the list.
All right, and then finally, public notification, engagement and ordinance and zoning changes. We discussed it, we were discouraged by the current city planner and it was dropped. So, I do see the complications of trying to do more. In terms of the city,
Well, tonight's minutes will reflect the fact that it's been dropped, and that's all I needed.
okay, so does the commission agree that our last year's or whenever that happened, public notification engagement, we chose to not pursue it back then? Is that everyone's memory that?
Well, I remember specifically the discussion of could we expand notification
Mhm.
when there's a potential, what is it now, 300 feet on 300 feet? Would we expand that in those cases? And there was the comment from our professional that potentially could be litigious if there were different standards, or even though that we were going above, someone would later say you frequently go above. You didn't in my case, though, and this time you didn't use it to 300 feet. So.
Right.
Well, I think additionally, it was advised that we stay with the state standards,
Right, right.
not deviate from the state standards.
All right, so is it everyone comfortable about crossing that off the list?
Well, the only thing, I mean, I think there's been some feeling, I certainly agree with Charlie, whatever we can do to engage, notify in a better way, I sometimes feel like there must be some better ways we can do things. So that was one thing we thought we probably wouldn't do. I don't know if we ever exhausted more of a discussion of, is there anything else we can do?
It doesn't prevent the planning commission or the city from posting on the website or their Facebook page that there's a public hearing or a public meeting on a certain topic, in addition to the 300 feet notification. And that's what a lot of communities are doing. They send the 300 feet, the notice out 300 feet to meet the state statute, and then they also post a small story in the public notice on Facebook or the city website, so other people can get informed as a way of increasing the degree of
So
engagement.
that would be in addition to our agendas that get posted.
Yeah.
You could hire a town crier too.
So are we putting this to rest or do we want to,
I think when
Any further
if the subject
discussion?
comes up again, that we feel there's some additional need for notification, we can address it at that time.
I do think that whatever we do, it needs to be a standard. Like if we adopt it, then it seems like it ought to be.
I agree. I think we need to have some discussion of what kind of things we would put a notice for in general. Just for some consistency,
Mhm.
so.
All right, so do we want to open this back up as for discussion?
Well, I think if staff had some ideas and brought us something that was simple and straightforward.
Okay, so I'm gonna put a check next to that one as well as the possible ordinance changes to the rooftop decks. Keep those floating for future discussion. All right, now let's go back to we are going to be really focused in the next year on our zoning ordinance. So I feel like a lot of this is going to actually be wrapped up in the redoing of the zoning ordinance. I think we're going to be spending a lot of time on that. So personally, I think we ought to just focus on the zoning ordinance issues that we, like reducing the number of zones, allowing more density, those major, as you put it, the sky high issues.
Well, do we have a roadmap for that? Do we know what issues we want to address, how we want to address it? Do we have a process for this? Are we going to get any education in advance on basic issues and state of the art practices and so forth?
So John, you want to
Elaborate.
Yes. Before we start the ordinance, I'll put together a presentation on what are some of the current best zoning reform practices. So everybody on the planning commission can weigh in on what they think is reasonable and doable for the city before the committee actually dives into any one of those topics. So yes, I'll go over what's referred to as the zoning toolbox with you, and then let the commission kind of determine the temperature, like they're hot on this one, they're lukewarm, and they really don't want to explore that topic. So the committee's not wasting time on areas that the full commission doesn't have a desire to move into.
Well, on the short-term rental ordinance, the inspection ordinance and rental inspection ordinance and this electric vehicle, I think that the select committee helped move things along at a better pace. But is that the way that the commission wants to proceed for the zoning ordinance reforms? Or would we choose a different path and discuss it as a commission and just simply have more meetings?
The commission already decided to have a zoning subcommittee, and members have already volunteered for it.
Charlie, isn't Charlie? on?
He's an alternate.
Yeah,
Who's the alternate? Okay.
If I remember right, it's Ted's on it, Rick is on it,
Oh, yeah.
Cynthia's on it. And Charlie, you're an alternate.
right.
So,
You know,
Doug?
if I may, and I guess I'll express my opinion again, and I'm not sure how well I articulated it from initially. Using these smaller select committees, I do have a concern just in terms of the process. I think there's some value in terms of discussing it as a larger group, in terms of education of all members, flushing out some of these issues. If you're not at select committee and ideals are presented at the committee, at times some commissioners may feel a little bit behind, and there's a little bit of catch up to do, that some issues have been, that debate and the education has already occurred for that. I expressed some concern about having a select committee, in particular on this one, just because I felt like this is kind of the core of what we do, is the zoning. And so to Charlie's comments, and I know that we made a decision here, but I'm still a little fuzzy in terms of how the select committee and the overall committee works together. And I understand the benefits of the efficiencies. I still want to express a concern on what we lose by having a select committee versus having a more broad discussion with all the commissioners.
Ted?
And the other thing too, I think, to go along with that, how much time we're gonna save. This is a pretty important and big overreaching important issue. Will we actually spend more time than the fuller meetings trying to re-educate, get up to speed with the people who are in the select meeting, because it's an important topic. They're very interested. They want to make a good decision. Will it save time, or will it be just problematic?
Relitigating.
Not relitigating, but just redoing the discussion. Yeah. Basically.
Carolyn?
Oh, well, will we be doing it like we did the electric charging stations, where we looked at it as a whole and then it went to the subcommittee? Will that be what you're?
yeah, let me give you a rundown on the zoning stuff. If the whole group wants to get involved in the production of the zoning ordinance, candidly, we're probably talking 2 to 3 years. Okay, because it'll take forever to get through all of the various chapters. What I have found over the years is that the planning commission as a whole establishes the overarching ideas, like, do you want to consolidate zoning districts? Where and how many? Do you want to go to administrative review on some site plans to expedite the review process for applicants? The planning commission needs to decide that. The subcommittee works on the wordsmithing, which is in itself pretty onerous in terms of going page by page, making sure that every comment, every dash, everything makes sense. And to do that, if for the whole group to do that, in my opinion, is really a waste of time. Because you should be looking at other things as we're moving along. I would not recommend that you just mire yourself in rewriting a zoning ordinance for the next year or two, because there's other issues that need to be discussed at the planning commission that are outside of zoning, that are more into the area of planning. So it's kind of a balance. You need the full commission needs to weigh in on the goals and the broader issues. The committee works on the wordsmithing, kind of like what we've done on the other ordinances, and then bring it back to the group to review. So that seems to be more efficient.
If I understood your earlier comment, you would begin by, for instance, a presentation, perhaps in a workshop setting or in at a regular meeting, it doesn't matter. An overview of the toolkit, for instance.
Correct.
And things that are happening in other communities our size, relevant casework and so forth. And then guide us toward a section of the toolkit that we should consider focusing on.
Correct.
And then we would have an open discussion after perhaps reviewing that and thinking about it, an open discussion of that section as a commission, and then send it to the select committee for the wordsmithing, who then would return it to the commission for full commission debate.
Correct. So it works.
And if I could just add for a point of clarity, and this would be different in terms of how the other select committees have been operating, where we tend to have not a 100% finished product, but I'm thinking of the short-term ordinance,
Right.
where there wasn't a initial discussion, feedback. This is going to be truly the select committee is going to be more the role of the wordsmithing and the driving the goals and the objectives of that will be done prior to the commission then receiving the wordsmithing.
Yeah, and the
production.
other part of this is that on the zoning code, the real important issues, like if let's say the planning commission desires to consolidate zoning districts. Well, even before we go into writing what the consolidation is going to be, the planning commission needs to make a presentation to city council. Because you're not going to waste your time if council's not going to.
Thank you.
So at every important milestone, before we actually get into writing the text, a group of the planning commission, usually it's the chairperson that makes the presentation. We'll present to the council, this is what we're recommending. Do we have your buy-in? And if they say yes, then you proceed. If they say no, then you go into a different direction.
Would you include the workshops, the broad overarching workshops? Would you include council in that in a joint session?
I typically like to do those on a Saturday and then invite everybody. It's more of an informal educational workshop session where people can talk, and then you can have a roundtable discussion on what you think is needed and what direction the community needs to go in. So the big part of the zoning code is the districts and the regulated uses. That's key. There's other issues regarding design guidelines and dimensional analysis. Once we get through that, the rest of the code is basically statutory. Site plan review, special land use, zoning board of appeals, interpretation. That's all procedural stuff. That's not going to change much. But the real key is mapping out what zoning districts you want, what you want in those zoning districts, and what the built environment's going to look like as a result. That's where the heavy lifting is at. The rest of it is administrative and enforcement issues. So,
John, I have a question. All this sounds good, and some people have feelings, maybe consolidation of districts, boy, that's good, that's not good, I don't know. I mean, information is key. When we move forward, I can see a discussion isn't just with a headliner, do we want to consolidate districts, but it would be several elements in that presentation. You know, current trends in zoning, what are the pros of doing it, what are the cons of doing that? And then the last part would be, as a city, you know, do we at some point, at what point, try and get some community engagement, reach out to citizens on things like this?
You know, the way that we've worked it before is that once you get through the discussion on on the zoning districts. Okay, you may want to keep the same ones you have, but then again, you may want to collapse some of them. When you get to that point, then you would want to have an open house for the community to come in and take a look at what your recommendations are and get feedback. You don't want to wait until the end when you have a draft public hearing, and then the community starts questioning what you're doing. So at each point in the front part of the process where the major decisions are, you want to do two things. You want to go to council, get their feedback, and then you want to go and have an open house and invite the community and get their feedback, and then you move on to the next step. It's a very integrative and it's a very involved process. So
I think it would be similar to what we did for the Emmett Street corridor. And we had neighborhood, it would be kind of that process. Many of you weren't on at that time, but.
I just wonder, John, I mean, I hear a lot of good things, and clearly you have a lot of experience doing this in a plan. Maybe it's not as apparent to everyone here. Is there, in a simplistic or simpler way, flowchart way, something could be drawn up, maybe, and just kind of shown us?
I can put together a kind of a process flow chart to show where the key milestones.
That might be showing and helpful.
Yeah, I can do that for you.
Then I wanted to say I did agree with regard to a lot of the good things Commissioner Wilmot has here. I do think these are part of that discussion then. And so we have maybe these ideas and a few more. As we're going through, we keep reminding ourselves, did we think of this topic in this district? Did we, you know, and that's how I think I agree would seem to make sense.
Yeah, please understand, this is a catalog of ideas that are mentioned in the master plan.
Right.
This is not Charlie's list of ideas. Nor is it my list of priorities.
Right. But we easily could lose track if we don't have some reminders at points.
Yes.
What we're doing, because it's a pretty big undertaking.
Well, and as we're doing the undertaking, we will actually be looking at the master plan and saying, we're doing this because of this in the master plan.
John,
That would be acknowledged.
John, do architectural standards get addressed in the?
They can if you want, in the zoning code.
Yeah, because that's a whole other ball of wax
Well, you already have some in your current zoning district for the downtown already.
for the downtown,
Oh, yeah,
but not for the rest of the.
not for the residential district, no.
John, do you have any comments? And previously we had with our two city planners ago with Amy, we had discussed some time ago, I will say, more of a form-based zoning approach, of which I have some familiarity with, but I wouldn't say total. And how does those ideas, or is that not where we're going, or?
Well, you can, in your code. Don't forget though, you're already pretty much a built-out community. Form-based codes originated when architects and planners wanted to create resort towns that had the look and feel of historic communities. You already have a built community, but one of the things that some communities are doing that are older is that rather than try to retrofit suburban zoning standards, 25-foot yard front setback, 30-yard rear setback, you know, let's go back to 1930, is that some communities are managing redevelopment in the neighborhoods by following the historic land development pattern. So the setback in the front is not a mandated 25-foot, but it's the average of the setbacks on the block. So you get some articulation. Same thing with the side yards. So those are some of the discussion issues that we can have with the planning commission.
Right.
And the city council.
And that's one of my broad overview questions is, you know, we do have these historic areas. I live in an older area and when things don't meet code, they're non-compliant.
Correct.
We really, I'm assuming, or maybe do you really want to, maybe if that's really the look of the neighborhood, that may become how the code changes to basically allow what's there. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
exists.
yeah,
Instead of having mandated standards where people then have nonconformities. The standards are basically based on neighborhood, the development pattern historically of that neighborhood.
yeah,
I mean, the neighborhoods on like along the Bear River,
yeah,
which they have smaller housing units on smaller lots are different than other neighborhoods on the other side of town. But we're taking the same standards and overlaying them on the same districts. And they just, in some cases, they don't work. And if you're talking, like, you're talking about issues like affordable housing, then you gotta be cognizant of what your build standards are. So you don't require somebody that has a small lot to meet the standards of somebody that has a larger lot. So these are the things that we can,
Well, and you don't
these
also
are the
don't,
things you need to talk about as a group,
you don't want to inadvertently encourage tear downs
correct?
and replacements.
Right,
When in fact, what we're trying to do is preserve the charm and the historic character of the
Right.
town. So, yeah, these are all issues that are big overarching issues that we need to have clear discussion on before getting to the wordsmithing.
yeah, my recommendation would be. We have a training session or a educational session. Opened it up to planning commission and city council, but then I think at some point, planning commission and city council need to. Have a nexus on what they want the ordinance to achieve. So the planning commission is getting appropriate direction from the city council on what those parameters are.
Can we suggest any dates?
But when you suggest dates when it involves the council, I need to talk to Shane about.
Well, of
what
course,
his-
but I mean,
his calendar.
at least throw out some potential work
Yeah,
dates for us.
I'm thinking that I'm getting, we need to get started on it.
Yeah,
So I'm thinking right after the first of the year, we should start talking about having a Saturday work session. And
well, we have a meeting now scheduled on January 17th. January's right around the corner, Dan.
I need to talk with, Lisa and I'll need to talk with the city manager relative to council calendar.
I understand that, but it'd be a shame to have to wait till January 17th to make any final decisions on special workshop dates or whatever, so.
We can do that internally and then communicate with the chair and then later on the planning commission.
Yeah, that could probably all be done on email,
Yeah,
what date, picking dates, we can do that through email.
and then while we're talking about these things, there's a couple of them in here that I don't really want to move forward on with the planning commission until we get direction from city council. Areas like housing plan redevelopment does the council want to move ahead with an enterprise zone? And then task the planning commission on evaluating it and where it should be. There's issues in here with local economy. I know that the council has been working on or will be working on an economic development policy relative to tax incentives. So they need to provide that kind of information to the planning commission. What I'm getting at is I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on work program unless the council is involved in saying, yes, this is where we want to go.
Would you consider starting by providing a list like this?
We can, or maybe I can go through and refine it relative to what I think the major themes are.
Mhm.
And then share that with the manager, and then he can share it with the mayor and council. But I think the planning commission needs to get some direction from council on issues that are other than zoning. Okay? Like I said, how far does council want to go with housing rehabilitation? Do they want to take a look at the use of neighborhood enterprise zones? Are they open to using the new residential tax abatement district incentives in different neighborhoods? If they want to do that, then it's up to the planning commission then to take a look at those tools and based on data, determine what the most
Recommend a
appropriate
strategy,
locations
right.
would be, and then report back to the council. Okay,
Yeah, affordable housing obviously is one of the goals, but we have to keep in mind that there are also other broad goals that we need to keep in mind as well. Petoskey's population is declining and aging. And we need to make modifications in the zoning to revitalize this town for the next 25 to 50 years. And we need to know from you, what other communities are doing, where they're placing their priorities in order to reach those kinds of goals.
Happy to.
John, so you mentioned some big topics city council will have to discuss, but to really have a discussion, they'll need. I don't know how much they've had, but you know, there'll be some kind of informational. Discussion with them before, not, you know, some of these topics are a little bit complex. Again, it's pros and cons of doing these things. It just seems like each of those discussions is not just a quick question. Do you
No,
want
it's
to do
not, and I think
that?
I think that's the importance of having a joint session with the city council is to talk some of the bigger issues. But what I'm getting at is that if the planning commission articulates what they think are some issues that they think you want to take a look at, or you think where the community needs to go, it's really up to council to say, we agree with you, we need to do this, this, and this, so we can spend our resources accordingly. So, but you're right, Commissioner, in order to get that, you need to have an exchange between both groups. And I think I always encourage that planning commission and city council at least meet once a year to talk about some broad objectives, or broad goals that they want to do. So, and if any of those require planning commission involvement, then the planning commission can put that on their work plan. And then they can report back to the commission on that.
I think one meeting, but for this process, I think one meeting is de minimis. I think, you know, if this is a big effort, and I think we need to make sure we're on the same page as frequently as possible.
Yeah. So we'll coordinate with the city manager's office on a potential date to get this thing going.
January if possible.
We'll suggest
January if possible.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? Rick, can you turn it green?
Yeah, thanks for reminding me. As this list or these topics get discussed again or noted again, I just wanted to make a small correction under architectural standards. The historic districts topic there should be more correctly stated. Create locally designated historic districts, because we really don't, or I guess if you want to say create additional historic districts, well then it would be correctly stated to say additional National Register historic districts and locally designated historic districts, because there are two very different types of historic districts. Just in terms of carrying this topic forward.
Thank you. All right. So we are on to public comment. So this is an opportunity for the public to comment on items not on the meeting agenda.
Yeah, my name is Edward Moss. I live at 510 Hillcrest Street. I'm commenting on something on the agenda. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but okay. First of all, Chair Robson and Planning Commission members, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. Coming up out a week before Christmas. We really appreciate the work you do. I know how hard it must be because I go through a lot of your reports and it's like, wow. And it sounds like, I mean, you have a large list of priorities for 2024. And if I understand the discussion you just had, you have taken what was an unresolved or listed as a possible unresolved item, the building height in B3A off your list. Okay, so and you seem to agree with me that this item was actually resolved the last time you officially dealt with it, which is 9/15/22, when you sent to City Commission for their approval. So I fully support taking this off your agenda. And if my understanding is correct, a great holiday gift. I cannot tell you. I have family and I every week look at every time there's a meeting, I look at your agenda. I've been asked to be on the commission and I've respectfully declined. But I really respect your work. We have a core group of neighbors up in the hillside in Regent, and Hannah Drive neighborhoods that were affected by the B3A. When they heard this, it was like, oh my God, it's coming around again. So the fact that it's not coming around again, we are relieved. Now, I know that zoning reform and consolidation, this checkup by map that not only the public, one of our commissioners has often said, how do you follow this map? It does need to be reformed. I agree with that. I just respectfully request that any zoning reform consider concerns of adjacent neighborhoods about the height building along Spring Street in the southwest corner of Sheridan and Spring Street. That is what was B3A. B3A may go away, but that is an important to all those neighborhoods, that height. And one of the a couple other things that you just mentioned that I thought was important, neighborhood standards. Are deed covenants going to be looked at as you look at this? For example, the Preby Acres neighborhood, which was basically developed in the 1950s, has a deed covenant that other than one or two houses that were on the edge of that neighborhood, they cannot go over 25 feet. They cannot go up to, they can't go a story and a half. They cannot go up to by deed covenant. So if you're going to look at historic things in neighborhoods, I think the deed covenants of some of those neighborhoods should be considered. I don't know if that's within your purview or not. I've sat through your meetings, and at one meeting, I will tell you, I thought you guys were just messing with me. Because I was just early in there, because you were going line by wordsmith by wordsmith over some details, and we had a whole room full of people that I brought here to talk about B3A. And I understand more about this now, and but I thought they're just doing this to make us tired and go away. And I know now, but you can see where I was coming from. Okay, so I understand and I like that. I do speeding up the process, but I think if you're going to have select committee reports come to this commission, and you guys were talking about notification, that needs to be out as early as possible so that concerned citizens can participate in the process, which was one of your concerns. And so I subscribe to the city newsletter, and every time there's something on there, we get that. If as soon as the packet and the agenda for the meeting are posted on the website, if that could be an instantaneous notification. I don't know if there's any way to do that, Lisa. I know you're a busy person, so I don't know if that's possible, but it's be something to talk to at least Commissioner Horn, not just for your commission, but Parks and Recreations and all the other ones. If you want citizens to be involved, they got to know. If you don't know, you can't be involved.
If I could ask, are you talking subcommittees or?
Yes, but when his reports come, because at that point, when you're going to start talking about, I don't want to go to subcommittee meetings, but when his reports are going to come to you and you guys are going to start discussing those, the earliest notification so that we can start as citizens, start looking at those and bring you input. I think it's important, so I would like to suggest that if there's a way to notify the public when big zoning, like you said, this is the biggest thing you're doing. Zoning is the biggest thing this commission's responsible for. And if you can bring those let the public know through the website, like Lisa puts it up there, almost immediately can something go out, hey, we just put this packet up, and I would think for any of the commissions, Parks and Recreations for anything. Go ahead.
Community members can request to receive the packets. You just have to contact staff to get put on that list. We don't have a mass mailing that we can send to every resident in the city. So
But
you can request that we send it to you and we include you when that goes out.
Right.
We don't have any way to put a bulletin across the website for.
Almost weekly, I get a newsletter. It couldn't go in there that the packet's up or in that.
The packets get put on the website. They are attached to the calendar as well.
Okay.
So,
okay.
yeah.
It just a suggestion. So, and then, I like this idea that you guys are gonna have a planning commission and city, because what happened with us was there was the right hand, left hand having a hard time knowing what they were doing, happens in every organization. But are those workshops with the decision makers there all being present? I think it'll be public meetings. Okay, I just want to make sure I was clear about that. Okay, perfect. Again, thank you for this wonderful Christmas present.
Lisa, in follow-up, for the planning commission, the packets are almost always, if not always, available the Thursday before our Wednesday scheduled meeting, Friday before our Wednesdays. So check on.
That's what I usually do.
Well, Lisa, you're saying, and I was aware that any citizen can be put on the mailing list. So when I get the packet as a planning commissioner, you'll get it, right? Right at that one,
That would be,
right?
I'll do that. I'll do that. Yeah. Thank you.
does it go through, does it get sent on email or do you actually physically mail them?
No.
Through me, you might, okay. All right, any other public comments? Name and address, please.
Thank you, commissioners. Lindsay Walker, 1312 Emmett Street. Thank you for the list of priorities, and I really appreciate you, Charles, kind of leading the charge on that discussion. I'm sure it's transpired over many months, and there's probably others involved, but a lot of the referral to the Living Petoskey Master Plan is the requests and desires for changing in zoning represented by City Council. So that document is still a living, working beacon of opportunities and goals that the city wants to have. And it went through that very public process, as you know, and was approved in July of 2021. I'm also hopeful that part of that toolkit that we're going to be utilizing is the Michigan Association of Planners spiral bound document that you and I both picked up a copy of during the 2022 housing conference in Traverse City. And I would hope that that document, if it hasn't been provided to everybody here on Planning Commission, that it should be, because those are the best management practices for reforming zoning. And so in many of our discussions in City Council and in public meetings, we've talked about putting up a version of our zoning map on the wall blown up so you could see and be able to refer to it every time we had a discussion about zoning. So whether that be around consolidation of residential zones, that conversation came up again at the last City Council meeting when we were approving your recommendations for the B2, B3 zone change or spot zoning change for the Kelchick Budnick property on Petoskey Street. There's many houses that are zoned R3 there that are actually multifamily, and maybe they fell out of the licensing or ordinance process and became multifamily without anybody knowing it. So there's a case where both R2 and R3 should, in my opinion, be the same thing, and maybe all residential zones should be zoned under the same thing, because it seems like residential 1 feels like the most elitist zoning that there is, and then it proceeds down to less elitist. So like everything should include multifamily, everything should be open for residential zoning, a big blank zone. That would be my ideal situation. Another question I had, and this goes back to decisions that you had made here in regards to how first floor is zoned in B2, B3 in mixed use zoning. From our previous discussions in the central business district around B2 zoning, when 200 East Lake Street was under proposal by the developer from Howard Properties, so Bob Berg. The reason that that was turned down, his development at 200 East Lake Street, was because there was a proposal for brownstones on the first floor of that development, and that was one of the reasons that it was turned down, that development. And so there's been a lot of confusion. I'll try to be as concise as possible, but this reflects the confusion around zoning. So in B2 and B3 districts, short-term rentals are being considered commercial uses of property. So in the B2, in the central business district, We don't want residential on the first floor, but a short-term rental could be considered on the first floor in the central business district because it's not a residential use, it's a commercial use. And that policy was extrapolated to B3 and all other mixed-use zones. So now we're hyper confused about short-term rentals are considered commercial uses. So first floor properties can be a commercial short-term rental use. And so I was hoping maybe for a little bit of clarity on that. I've gone back and forth several times in the actual city council meeting, but also with the city manager. And I think there's a need for hyper clarity around the intent. And does one zone just follow suit of the other by its nature? So does B3 always follow B2, or does B2 always follow 3 in those mixed uses for residential first floor not allowed and short-term rentals being considered commercial uses and others are permitted on the first floor? Thanks.
Can I comment on that?
I think I wrote it down.
Okay.
Did you want to public comment?
I think let's try to address councilperson her comment first.
Well, I'm a little concerned, John. Council needs to act as a body and it's really confusing. I mean, Commissioner Walker is very interested in these matters, but we don't know to what extent the council, I think we're better to, in fact, we're discouraged from going to other meetings and speaking without a full body. I just don't think we start a whole discussion with one council member about where we're going with things and that. I find it inappropriate and actually against recommendations. I think we, the planning commission, should at many times interact with the city council as a whole and not get into one-offing and coming to someone's meeting and.
That's the city commission prerogative, if you want me to go that way or not. I think Commissioner Walker was just.
I showed up here as Lindsay Walker from 1312 Emmett Street, and that's how I address myself.
Right, but you're a city council member and it's specifically discouraged from going to other meetings.
That is not correct,
Yeah.
Ed Paul. Where did you get that from?
Yeah.
I'm not speaking, I'm Lindsay Walker from 1312 Emmett Street. Thank you.
Right,
I want that.
yeah.
You got what? The ordinance, okay, look, just for an explanation. Your ordinance is set up like many ordinances around the country where it's basically a pyramid. Where a use in one district is then allowed in another district, and all those uses in those two districts are then allowed in the third district, and all those three districts then are allowed in the fourth district. The STR ordinance was set up that it was very specific that short-term rentals in the business district would not be allowed on the first floor. Primarily because of the use, that they're an interim use of property. The other aspect that was discussed by the planning commission was that they didn't want STRs competing with first floor retail, which the city has a very limited amount of space left. Primarily the impact that it would have on Mitchell, where you have, for example, the former McLaren billing office is vacant. You've got the Nagoya restaurant, which is vacant, Rite Aid, which is vacant. So the concern was we did not want to have short-term rentals compete for that space, because the city does not have really any other place for retail development. So that was a decision made that's in the ordinance. So the short-term rental ordinance, zoning ordinance, basically was a split away. It basically severed that relationship that's found in the other part of the ordinance where everything's compiled together. The other part of the ordinance that Lisa was going to bring up but she's having difficulty, is that currently in the zoning ordinance, you have it here, whatever one you got it available,
Mhm.
where you can show the commission. Here, I'll let Lisa explain. This is the current chart that's in your ordinance today.
So with the B3 district specifically, it states that any commercial use follows the B2 standards. In the B2 district, a residential use, which is what, while it may be a commercial business, it is a residential use where people will be residing. It states that it is not permitted on the first floor. So let me scroll. If you'll see under residential, it states that the first column on this, on the left side is first floor, and then the second column is upper floors. So single family boarding house, nursing home, 2-family, multiple family dormitory, none of those are allowed on the first floor in any B2 zone district or any district that refers to the B2 district for that use.
So the STR ordinance is consistent with those requirements already. So, like Lisa said, short-term rentals are looked at as a commercial use because it's income property, but actually the use of the property is residential because people are residing in those units. So that's the difference.
Even though it's for less than 30 days.
Yes. And that's how the ordinance was passed. And it was done intentionally primarily to reduce the competition for first floor space in the business district, which we all talked about. So.
John, is that subject to appeal at the zoning board of appeals if they can meet the criteria of the appeal process?
They can go to the zoning board and appeal for a use variance. That's the only thing they can appeal is for the use variance. But there's nothing dimensionally, that ordinance.
For the use variance. So if they met the burden of proof at the zoning board of appeals, they could conceivably get the use.
Anybody has the right to ask for a use variance if they meet the standards.
Right, so conceivably, if they met the standards with that use variance at the zoning board of appeals, they could in fact run a short-term rental business on the ground floor in that area.
If they applied for a use variance and the board felt that they met the standards.
Yes, thank you.
On any zoning provision, there's always the relief valve that a person can go to the zoning board of appeals if they feel they have a hardship.
And the standard is hardship.
Standards hardship.
Right.
Okay, so continue with public comment.
Yeah.
Name and address, please.
My name is Mallory Powell.
Right.
This is my husband, John Powell. We are the owners of 215 West Mitchell Street. We purchased in summer of 2021 after clearing with the city clerk that we could in fact convert the lower floor to a residential unit for the purposes of STR. We were not given any stipulations. We were not actually alerted to the change in the zoning. When I applied for my business license in March of 2023, 2 weeks after the initial reading at the city council meeting, my business license was held back for 6 months with no notification. It was only in October, I sent September 8th, but October 6th, I received a notice of running an illegal short-term rental, which I am not, it is not open. That Sarah said, well, I've had your license for your business license sitting on my desk for 6 months. In the context of this discussion, it does seem obstructionist, but that's not why I'm up here. I actually have not intended to speak this evening. I have given quite a few public comments at the city council meeting. I've gone as far as to propose things that we can do to actually seize upon an opportunity we have in the zoning. The challenge that I'm finding here is, quite frankly, it doesn't seem like confusion. It seems like the zoning law is being misrepresented to further whatever argument or conversation you are in. So for example, I'd like to read to you from the principal uses permitted, #1 in B3 zoning. Any commercial use in the B2 district and any residential uses permitted in the RM2 multiple family district. It is mixed use. There is nothing that says that there cannot be a residential use on the first floor of B3, which I presume is why we were told when we purchased this years ago that we could convert the lower level. My husband and we're in our mid-30s, we're not investors. We moved here from Chicago, and this business was a means of getting us here. It was not because we want to change the town. In fact, being a part of the iconography of this town and being tourists of this town for so long is particularly why we wanted to do this business. We were so motivated to create the type of accommodations we couldn't find and often went elsewhere to do. We have at every juncture been ahead of following the rules. We have made our intents known to the city from before the time that we purchased in contingency to filing our business license. And it is frustrating when I speak to people in the city and the answer changes. If I refer you to John's comments that started 2 hours and 28 minutes at the last city council meeting, we spent about 20 minutes discussing short-term rentals as a residential use. It is done under the pretenses that B3 follows B2, which, as you just heard from the zoning law, is not correct. For residential uses, we follow RM2. My concern, and again, I'm here from Chicago, so my understanding of, or having moved here from Chicago, my understanding of the way our city government functions is that the city council is really the check and balance that stands between the electorate and unelected officials in making sure that our voices are heard and our needs are represented before laws are passed. It seems to me a conflict of interest if those laws are being misrepresented in order to further an agenda. And to me, we have a huge opportunity here. I hear what John is saying with regard to we have a limited amount of retail space, but that's a little bit of a misdirection. We have a limited amount of everything space. And as of right now, this community has a major issue with commercial vacancies and blight. And concurrently, we have a housing shortage for long-term housing, and we have a lodging shortage in a primarily tourism-based economy. So when you look at the vacancies in a mixed-use area like B3, and you're trying to protect the McLaren building, you're trying to protect the former Rite Aid, doesn't it seem like a perfect district to then allow short-term rentals? And one further thing that I would like to comment on, I feel like everyone is a little sick of the short-term rental discussion because it tends to drag on. It's very contentious. People have hot issues on both sides. And I would like to posit that I think the city's position on that is what is creating that environment. It is all about short-term rentals are this amorphous bad thing, rather than broadening your perspective on how professional business operating in a commercial building, maybe people like myself, who is a hospitality business owner in one of the biggest markets in the country of 10 years, to start something that will be run like a tight ship, like a business. We need lodging. Anything that has to come through you guys, major hotel, major, long-term housing projects, those are going to take a long time. They're prohibitive to every person, but a short-term rental is something we can act on soon. So why wouldn't, instead of making this argument where it's us versus them, you can't have a short-term rental, it's you can't have a short-term rental here. And that's why I agree that the residential areas are at risk. But you can have a short-term rental here. That immediately changes the tone of the discussion. And I wasn't prepared to say anything else. There's a multitude of other things I would be willing to share. I even went down to as far as when if the state legislation were to pass on short-term rentals, that would be catastrophic for Petoskey. If 30% of our available housing can then become short-term rentals, that is the worst case scenario. And we've spent half a year now reforming this already very narrow law. I want to point you to the fact that 8 properties, all in commercial districts, have succeeded since 2014 in even getting licenses. Meanwhile, Airbnb has seen a 19,000% growth, growing from 800,000 to 150 million. Clearly, the zoning is already prohibitive enough. And we're focusing on the same amorphous thing rather than seeing a real opportunity that is available to us. And again, if it were to pass, what are we doing to protect ourselves? The zoning ordinance goes out the window. Wouldn't it instead make more sense when we're talking about tax incentives to think about incentivizing people to offer long-term housing? Because people who may
then be shifted towards short-term rentals if the worst case scenario happens. They say, that's a lot of work to do. And especially if there's not the scarcity that there is now, the prices are going to come down. So why not incentivize those people to continue offering long-term housing? I don't know if this fact is current, but my real estate agent, when we moved here, shared that something like 50% of the houses downtown are actually rented right now. Could you imagine if more than half of those decided to become short-term rentals? We need to do something proactive, and we need to stop just adding regulatory language for regulatory language's sake. My husband and I have taken our time. We take great pride. We want to make sure we're the gold standard for it here in Petoskey, and now we're being told when we're over a year into the project that we can't have it anymore. Our architect backed out because while she was supportive of what we were saying, she has to work with the city. How can she work with us? We're 35 years old. We're not investors. We've invested our entire life savings into this. And it just seems like decisions are being made by a small group of people without the correct basis of information to make them, and they are affecting our livelihoods. And I also have to explain to you how it feels to me. I'm 35 years old. I'm a woman of color. Every city council meeting I have attended, I have been the only person of color. I watched the city council somewhat flippantly discuss diversity and inclusion after 2 city council people heard and voted against the change of the zoning ordinance. And then I watched everybody kind of flippantly just pass through the language on diversity and inclusion, saying that they'll come back to it, but no one raised a date to talk about it. How is that supposed to make me feel when the zoning law is being applied to me differently than it's being applied to people of different ages, different genders? I've been yelled at by the mayor, stopped, while people living in residential zones who didn't clear it with the city before they purchased their property were allowed to speak. There are some major issues here that are both fundamentally based in zoning, but I have to be honest, the optics are not great. And it's not great for Petoskey moving forward. And I think it would behoove all of the different arms of the city to take another look at this, especially as you consider the larger use issues for the zones. Thank you. And I apologize for rambling. I did not prepare that.
Well, you've got 57 minutes and 21 seconds.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying that's good. All right. Any other public comment? All right, we're on to updates. Oh, yes, commissioner comments. Rick?
I just want to make the comment that you probably all know that Dean Burns passed away a couple of weeks ago. He was a 40-year member of our planning commission. And I just wanted to recognize his, his dedication to the city of Petoskey and the volunteer work that he did.
Thank you, Rick. I think some of us I certainly was a part of his 40 years working together.
I met with the infamous David Troutman.
Oh, yes.
And we all know David as a result of the packets that we get on a regular basis with various ideas. He just turned 88. He's a fascinating individual. He does everything, as you know, by hand. And he has some great ideas. And as a matter of fact, I think Matt embraced one of those ideas recently in a meeting. And that was the beautification of West Mitchell Street. And I specifically discussed that with him, as well as his ideas about signage entering the city. And I said, look, David, if you want to prepare them more concretely and more specifically, I'll be happy to ask the commission if there is an opportunity for you to present the idea verbally for the commission to see if they want to advance it at all in any way. So I'll stay in touch with David. He tends to be moving on to new ideas, so I'm not sure that he'll come back to these ideas, but fascinating man with a lot of historical knowledge about the city and the architectural history of the city.
Any other commissioner comments? All right, now moving on to updates.
We just wanted to provide an update to the commission to let you know that the City Park Grill Apartments, which was funded in part by the City Opera and the MEDC through a grant, they have come in and are working with Lisa going through the zoning permit. So we anticipate that project would start in 2024. So I wanted to give you an update if you see anything occurring over there. They received their approvals and now their state approvals, now they're in Lisa's department applying for their permit. So that's the update I wanted to give you.
Okay.
Any updates on the other housing projects?
Maple Block is still pursuing some funding. There's also an issue that I understand with the Mishta has an issue with the proximity of the oil tanks that are adjacent to the property or in the vicinity of the property that they're working through. Their project engineer has been working with Mike Robbins and Jason Fate, the city engineer, on refining the stormwater based on the review from Eagle. So they are proceeding into the more detailed engineering right now. So that's proceeding, but still subject to some additional funding. And then
Did they get the report back on the additional drilling that they did, environmental drilling?
I haven't seen it. It may have come, but I haven't seen it, Commissioner. And then the lofts on project is still proceeding, probably won't really kick off until 2024. And then there's also some funding nuances that they're finalizing as well. So kind of an update on the bigger projects.
Sign committee?
We are moving right along. We have finished the zoning piece of it, and then our next meeting will be looking at the definitions. So it's still a work in progress, but we're making progress.
Process question about the sign. Does that then come back to the planning commission for full planning commission review and comment
Yes.
Yes,
before then advancing? So the only anomaly there is that the sign committee is a combination of not only planning commissioners, but others as well.
We have a representative from the Downtown Business Association.
and he is leaving, so we have an opening for the sign committee.
But that position, is that a formal DMB position, and how is that
No.
formalized?
Well, the current zoning language in the sign ordinance says 2 members from the planning commission. And then, well, that's right, it's 1 member. And then 2 additional, it has to be 3 members.
So it's in the,
At
it's in
least
the
1
ordinance?
member has to be a planning commissioner.
Okay, it's in the ordinance. That's what I
Mhm.
didn't understand. Thank you.
Yeah. It's in the sign ordinance specifically. The sign ordinance is separate from the zoning ordinance.
Anything with the screening at the urgent care?
I have not heard anything back. I have heard through the grapevine that the office manager is no longer there. I think this is the 3rd one in the last year and a half. So I'm still trying to get an actual person to respond to me.
Is that something that the code enforcer can?
Right, that's what I'm wondering.
They have a permit for their fence. It's a matter of installing it. They have 12 months essentially to install it, based on the permit itself. I mean, there's only so much we can do. They have installed a fence. It's not the fence that was approved, hence the reason I pursued rectifying that situation. So again, unfortunately, the person I was dealing with is no longer there. That's my understanding, so.
But there has to be some resolution. I mean, there's owners.
Right. The thing is we can't, I mean, the difficulty is getting someone to install the fence. Some of these people are backed up for months.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's just, it's concerning with the school playground right there.
right,
You know, there's kids outside and people parking there and. So, yeah, I don't know what you can do, but it's concerning.
yeah, I
Yeah,
Mike
the-
calls in.
Yeah.
The problem is this thing was built over a period of time,
Mhm,
and that was a condition to open.
correct,
So that's when you hired the people
correct.
back
And
then, not,
looking at the history of what was the correspondence between the previous city planner that was dealing with them. There were many excuses along the way, from the very beginning. And again, like I said, I believe this is the third person that's been in this position that's responsible for it since they opened or right before they opened.
Any more update information? Questions? All right,
There's still an opportunity for another public comment.
I closed public comment already.
Thank you.
All right, I am adjourning this meeting at 7:30 PM.
I will check with, I'll have to check with the council to find out. Our attorney to find out if any.